A 17-year-old black kid sits in an emergency room waiting area, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead, his wrist swelling to twice its normal size. Clearly in pain, clearly needing medical attention, and the white nurse at the intake desk looks at him, looks at his bloodied face, and says, "We don't treat gang violence here. You need to leave before we call security." That's how this story begins. With those words, with that assumption, with that racism so casual it was delivered like she was reading from a script she'd memorized. And what that nurse didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that the kid's mother, the woman who would walk through those hospital doors exactly 14 minutes later, wasn't just any parent demanding answers. She was attorney Victoria Hayes, the hospital's own senior legal counsel, the woman who'd spent the last 8 years defending that institution against malpractice suits, discrimination claims, and policy violations. And in exactly 14 minutes, she was about to become their worst nightmare. My name is Marcus, I'm Victoria's nephew, and I witnessed this entire thing unfold. And I need to tell you this story because it's not just about what happened that day in St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital in Philadelphia. It's about every black parent's fear, every assumption made because of skin color, every moment when someone who looks like us has to be twice as credentialed, twice as professional, twice as perfect, just to be treated like a human being deserving of basic dignity. And this particular story, this moment of justice, it hit different because the person who had the power to make it right was right there, just 14 minutes away. Let me take you back to the beginning, to how we got to that emergency room in the first place. It was a Saturday afternoon in October, beautiful fall day, and my cousin Jamal, Victoria's son, 17 years old, junior at Central High, honor roll student, volunteers at the community center teaching kids chess, the kind of kid who says yes ma'am and no sir and holds doors open for strangers, was riding his bike home from his part-time job at the bookstore. Jamal's this skinny kid, 6 feet tall but maybe 150 pounds soaking wet, wears glasses, always has a book in his backpack, the least threatening person you could imagine. But none of that mattered when a driver ran a red light at the intersection of Broad and Lombard. The car clipped Jamal's back tire, sent him flying over the handlebars, and he landed hard on the concrete, hit his head on the curb, and his wrist bent backward at an angle that made the witnesses flinch. 3 people saw it happen, called 911 immediately, and one of them, an older white woman named Mrs. Patterson, stayed with Jamal until he could stand up. Here's what's important. Jamal wasn't robbed, wasn't in a fight, wasn't doing anything wrong. He was the victim of a hit-and-run driver who fled the scene. And Mrs. Patterson kept saying to the gathering crowd, "This poor boy, someone hit him and just drove away. We need to get him to a hospital." But Jamal, even dazed and bleeding, was worried about his mom. Victoria was in a deposition that afternoon, a big medical malpractice case. And Jamal knew she couldn't be disturbed, so he told Mrs. Patterson, "I can get myself to the ER. It's just a few blocks. I'll be okay." Mrs. Patterson insisted on calling him an Uber, gave the driver $20, and made sure Jamal got safely to St. Catherine's Memorial, the very hospital where his mother worked, where her office was on the 3rd floor of the administrative building, where her name was on the directory and her face was in the hallway of senior staff photos. Jamal walked into that ER at 3:47 p.m., blood running down the side of his face from the head wound, his right wrist cradled against his chest, swollen and turning purple, his shirt torn and dirty from the pavement. And he approached the intake desk where nurse supervisor Diane Mitchell was sitting. Now let me paint you a picture of Diane Mitchell, because understanding who she was is crucial to understanding what happened next. Diane was 52 years old, had worked at St. Catherine's for 26 years, and had a reputation, not a good one. Other nurses whispered about her, talked about how she treated patients differently based on how they looked, where they came from, what insurance they had. There were rumors of complaints, stories of Black and Latino families being made to wait longer, being questioned more aggressively, being treated with suspicion instead of care. But Diane had seniority. She had connections with hospital administration, or so she thought, and she'd never faced real consequences for her behavior. So it had become normalized, routine, just how Diane is. When Jamal approached her desk, bleeding and in obvious pain, Diane looked up from her computer and her first words, "I'm not making this up." Witnesses confirmed this later. Her first words were, "Where are your parents?" Not "what happened," not "let me get you some help," but "where are your parents?" Like a 17-year-old bleeding in an ER can't speak for himself. Like the first assumption was that he shouldn't be there alone. Jamal, polite as always even while hurt, said, "Ma'am, I was in a bike accident. A car hit me. I hit my head and I think my wrist is broken. I need to see a doctor." Diane looked at him, looked at his bloodied face, his torn clothes, and instead of immediate action, instead of triage protocol, she started an interrogation. "A bike accident? Where did this happen? Were you riding in traffic? Do you have insurance? Who's your primary care physician?" Jamal answered every question, explained about the red light, the hit and run, and then he said, "My mom works here. She's attorney Victoria Hayes. She's in the legal department, but she's in a meeting and I didn't want to bother her." And here's where it gets insane. Diane heard that. Heard Victoria Hayes, heard legal department, and instead of verifying, instead of taking 2 seconds to check, she assumed Jamal was lying. She assumed this black teenager in torn clothes with blood on his face was making up a story about his mother working there to try to get better treatment. She said, and multiple people in that waiting room heard this, "I'm sure you do have a mother who works here, and I'm sure she's very important. But right now, you need to tell me the truth about what happened because we don't treat gang violence in this ER." Gang violence. Those words. Jamal stood there, bleeding in pain, and he said, "Ma'am, I wasn't in a gang fight. I was hit by a car. There were witnesses. I can give you their names." And Diane cut him off. "Son, I've been doing this for 26 years. I know gang injuries when I see them. You have what looks like defensive wounds. You're nervous. You're making up stories about your mother, and frankly, we have real emergencies to deal with. I'm going to need you to leave before I call security." The waiting room went silent. About 12 people were sitting there, elderly folks waiting for test results, a mom with a kid who had a fever, a construction worker with a possible broken toe. And they all heard it. All saw this nurse refuse treatment to a bleeding teenager based on nothing but her racist assumptions. One person, a middle-aged black man named Robert, spoke up. "Excuse me, that kid is clearly hurt. You can't just send him away." Diane shot Robert a look that could freeze fire and said, "Sir, I'm handling this. Please don't interfere with hospital procedures." But Robert didn't back down. "Hospital procedures say you triage patients based on their injuries, not based on what you think they look like. That's a kid with a head wound. That's an emergency." Diane stood up, her face flushed, and she reached for the phone. "I'm calling security. You're both disrupting the ER." And that's when Mrs. Patterson, the elderly white woman who'd helped Jamal at the accident scene, walked in. She'd gone home, cleaned up, but couldn't stop worrying about whether Jamal had made it to the hospital okay, so she came to check on him. She saw Jamal standing at the intake desk, still bleeding, saw Diane on the phone calling security, and she marched right up to that desk and said in the most proper, authoritative, white lady voice imaginable, "What on earth is going on here? This young man was hit by a car. I was a witness. He needs immediate medical attention. Why is he still standing in the waiting room bleeding?" Diane's whole demeanor changed, instantly. She put the phone down, her voice shifted from hostile to accommodating, and she said, "Oh, ma'am, I apologize. We were just trying to understand the situation. Sometimes young people aren't truthful about how their injuries happened." Mrs. Patterson cut her off cold. "I just told you exactly how his injuries happened. A car ran a red light and hit him. He was thrown from his bicycle. There's nothing unclear about this. Get him a doctor. Now." And Diane, faced with a white woman's authority, finally, reluctantly, paged for a triage nurse. But the damage was done, the humiliation was complete, and Jamal, this honor student, this gentle kid who volunteers with children, had just learned a brutal lesson about how the world sees him. A triage nurse came out, a younger Latina woman named Sophia who looked horrified when she saw Jamal's condition, and she immediately started asking the right questions. Pain level, dizziness, nausea. When did this happen? She got him into a wheelchair and was about to take him back to an examination room when Diane said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Make sure you document everything. We need to protect ourselves in case this is gang-related." Sophia stopped, turned around and said, "Diane, what are you talking about? This is clearly a traffic accident." Diane lowered her voice, but not enough. "Just document it. You never know with these kids." These kids. Those words hung in the air like poison, and Jamal, sitting in that wheelchair with his head bleeding and his wrist throbbing, looked at the floor, and I could see it in his face. He was trying not to cry. Not from pain, but from humiliation, from rage, from the exhaustion of being 17 and black and constantly having to prove you deserve basic human dignity. Sophia wheeled Jamal back to examination room 7, and as she was cleaning his head wound and preparing to call for x-rays on his wrist, Jamal pulled out his phone with his good hand and texted his mom. "Mom, I'm okay, but I'm at the ER at your hospital, bike accident. Don't freak out." Victoria was just finishing her deposition when she felt her phone buzz, read the message, and her entire world stopped. She texted back, "Which ER?" "I'm coming right now," Jamal wrote. "St. Catherine's. Room 7, I'm fine." But Victoria knew her son, knew that "I'm fine" from Jamal meant he was downplaying something serious, and she grabbed her briefcase, told the senior partners she had a family emergency, and literally ran from the law offices 6 blocks away to the hospital. She burst through the ER entrance at exactly 4:01 p.m., 14 minutes after Jamal had first been refused help, still in her courtroom attire, tailored black power suit, cream blouse, her natural hair in a professional low bun, her bar association pin on her lapel, carrying the leather briefcase with the hospital's logo embossed on it because she was literally their attorney. Victoria walked straight to the intake desk, where Diane was now helping another patient, and she said in that calm, controlled voice that every lawyer learns, the one that's more terrifying than yelling, "Excuse me, I'm attorney Victoria Hayes. I'm legal counsel for this hospital, and I'm here to see my son Jamal Hayes, who came in about 15 minutes ago." Diane looked up, saw Victoria, and you could watch the color drain, and she understood immediately that something bad had happened before she arrived. Victoria found Jamal in room 7, and the moment she saw him, head bandaged, wrist in a temporary splint, dirt on his face, glasses cracked, she had to fight to keep her composure. She pulled the curtain closed, sat down next to him, and said softly, "Baby, tell me everything, from the beginning." And Jamal, who'd been holding it together for the past 20 minutes, finally broke. He told her about the accident, about Mrs. Patterson helping him, about walking into the ER bleeding, about Diane's questions, about being accused of gang violence, about being told to leave, about Mrs. Patterson having to intervene, about the words "these kids," and the humiliation of having to prove he deserved help while blood ran down his face. Victoria listened, and with every sentence, her jaw got tighter, her eyes got harder, and when Jamal finished, she squeezed his good hand and said, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to write down everything that happened, every word you remember, every person who was there. Can you do that?" Jamal nodded. Victoria kissed his forehead and said, "You did nothing wrong. Do you understand me?" "Nothing. What happened to you was racism, pure and simple, and it will not stand. Not here, not anywhere, and especially not in a hospital where I'm supposed to ensure we follow the law." She stood up, straightened her suit jacket, and walked back out to the waiting room with the energy of someone about to go to war. She approached the intake desk where Diane was trying very hard to look busy, and Victoria said, "Diane Mitchell, correct?" Diane nodded, not making eye contact. Victoria continued, "I need you to pull the security footage from this intake area for the past hour. I need the names of every person who was in this waiting room when my son arrived. And I need the supervising physician on duty right now to meet me in the patient advocate's office in 10 minutes. Can you do that?" It wasn't really a question, and Diane knew it. She nodded again, and Victoria added, "And to be very clear, this is not a mother making a complaint. This is the hospital's legal counsel formally notifying you that I'm initiating an internal investigation into a potential EMTALA violation. racial discrimination under Title VI, and patient rights violations. You have the right to have a union representative present for any questioning. Do you understand? The blood drained from Diane's face again because she understood exactly what that meant. EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, federally mandates that ERs provide screening and stabilization to anyone who comes in, regardless of ability to pay or any other factor, and refusing treatment to someone with visible injuries based on racist assumptions was a textbook violation that could cost the hospital its Medicare funding and result in personal fines up to $50,000 per violation. Victoria wasn't playing, wasn't grandstanding. She was building a legal case right there in the ER waiting room. And Diane was realizing that her 26 years of unchecked racism had finally caught up to her in the worst possible way. Within 15 minutes, the ER was in controlled chaos. The supervising physician, Dr. Raymond Chen, came down looking confused and concerned. The hospital's chief nursing officer, Patricia Williams, arrived looking alarmed. The patient advocate, the risk management director, even the hospital's chief operating officer appeared because when your senior legal counsel says she's initiating an investigation into her own institution, that's a 5-alarm fire. Victoria had them all meet in a conference room, and she laid it out with devastating precision. Her son, a minor, arrived at the ER. Previous complaints here that were never properly investigated, all involving patients of color, all marked as counseling provided, but no formal disciplinary action. Victoria nodded. That's a pattern, and that pattern is now a liability. This hospital is supposed to serve everyone in this community equally, and if we can't do that, if we allow staff to make racist assumptions about who deserves care, then we're failing our mission and violating the law. The COO, a man named David Preston, said carefully, "Victoria, I understand you're upset." And Victoria cut him off with a look that could melt steel. "David, I'm not upset as a mother right now. I'm upset as this hospital's attorney who's looking at potential federal violations, civil rights lawsuits, and reputational damage. If my son, the son of your legal counsel, was treated this way, how many other black and brown kids have been turned away? How many families have been humiliated and didn't have a lawyer for a mother to fight back? This isn't about my feelings. This is about institutional racism that we've apparently tolerated for years, and it stops today." The room was silent, and then Patricia Williams said, "You're absolutely right. And I'm ashamed we let it get to this point. Diane Mitchell will be suspended effective immediately pending investigation, and I want a complete audit of ER patient treatment disparities by race over the past 3 years. Victoria added, "And I want Diane Mitchell escorted from the building today. I want her access credentials suspended. And I want it made very clear to all staff that retaliation against anyone who speaks up about this, including the nurses and staff who may have witnessed her behavior over the years, will result in immediate termination." Within 2 hours, Diane Mitchell was suspended, was escorted out of the hospital by HR, and was facing a formal investigative hearing. Within a week, the hospital's audit revealed what Victoria suspected. Black and Latino patients in that ER had statistically longer wait times, were more likely to be questioned about drug use even when their injuries had nothing to do with substance abuse, and were more likely to have their pain undertreated compared to white patients with similar conditions. The data was damning, and it triggered a complete overhaul of ER protocols, mandatory implicit bias training for all staff, and the hiring of a dedicated patient equity officer. But here's the thing that really got to me, the part of this story that I think about late at night. Jamal shouldn't have needed his mother to be the hospital's lawyer for him to receive basic emergency care. Mrs. Patterson shouldn't have had to walk in and use her white authority to get him help. The system shouldn't require black people to be twice as credentialed, twice as connected, twice as perfect, just to be treated with basic humanity. What happened to Jamal happens to black people every day in hospitals, in schools, in stores, in every institution in this country, and most of the time, there's no lawyer mother to swoop in and make it right. There's just the humiliation, the pain, and the knowledge that your skin color makes people assume the worst about you before you even open your mouth. Victoria told me later, after everything calmed down, that the hardest part wasn't the legal fight. She's been fighting legal battles her whole career. The Hardest part was looking at her son's face when she found him in that ER room and seeing that he'd lost something, some piece of innocence, some belief that if you just follow the rules and be polite and work hard, you'll be treated fairly. She said, "Marcus, I've spent 17 years trying to protect him, trying to prepare him, trying to teach him how to navigate this world, and in 14 minutes, some racist nurse undid all of that, showed him that none of it matters, that he'll always be guilty until proven innocent in some people's eyes." 3 months later, Diane Mitchell was terminated after the investigation found multiple violations of hospital policy and patient rights, and she tried to sue for wrongful termination, claiming she was made a scapegoat. But her case went nowhere because the evidence was overwhelming and the hospital had documentation going back years. The ER changed, really changed. New protocols, new training, new leadership, and a transparency system where patient complaints about discrimination go directly to an independent review board, not just to supervisors who might ignore them. And Jamal? He healed physically. The wrist was fractured, but it healed clean. The head wound left a small scar hidden by his hairline, but the emotional scar runs deeper. He's angrier now, more aware, more guarded, and Victoria says she doesn't know if that's growth or damage, and maybe it's both. He still volunteers at the community center, still gets honor roll, still holds doors open for strangers, but now he carries his student ID, his insurance card, and a business card with his mother's credentials everywhere he goes like armor, like proof that he deserves to exist in spaces without being assumed to be a threat. The lesson here, if there is one, is this. Racism isn't always burning crosses and slurs shouted in the street. It's a nurse looking at a bleeding kid and seeing a gang member instead of a patient. It's systems and institutions that allow those assumptions to go unchallenged for years until someone with enough power demands accountability. And it's the exhausting reality that black excellence, black credentialism, black perfection are still not enough to guarantee you'll be treated with basic human dignity. Victoria used her power to get justice for Jamal. But she's one person. And there are millions of black kids who walk into hospitals, schools, stores, and police stations every day without a lawyer mother to defend them. And that's the real tragedy. That's the real work we still have to do. So the next time you hear someone say racism doesn't exist anymore, the next time someone claims we're post-racial, the next time someone suggests that black people just need to work harder or dress better or speak more politely, remember Jamal in that ER, bleeding and being accused of gang violence for the crime of riding his bike while black. Remember that it took his mother being the hospital's own lawyer to get him basic emergency care? And ask yourself, how many kids don't have that kind of mother and what happens to them?